My name is Eleanor Wilson, 72 years old and apparently disposable. My own son, my flesh and blood, convinced me I needed extra care
and shipped me off to Pine Grove Retirement Community. It's for your own good, Mom, he said.
but I knew the truth.
Thomas wanted my house. The house his father and I paid for, the house where I raised him, the house filled with 40 years of memories. Well, Thomas made his choice, and now has made mine. The papers are signed.
The house is sold.
And Thomas? Thomas is about to learn that sometimes the elderly parent you underestimate is the one who teaches you the most painful lesson of all. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about family justice and standing up for yourself,
Make sure to click that subscribe button.
this is the best way for you to support our work.
Thank you very much, and let's continue. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who'd seek revenge against her child. For 68 years, I prided myself on being patient, understanding, and forgiving.
My husband James used to tease me about it. Ellie, he'd say, you'd forgive a thief for stealing your purse and then offer to buy him lunch. And he wasn't wrong. I built my entire identity around being that mother, the one who was always there, who always understood, who always put her family first. James and I bought our colonial-style house on Maple Street in 1982, just before Thomas was born. It wasn't much then: 3 bedrooms, outdated kitchen,
And a backyard that was more weeds than grass. But it was ours.
James worked extra shifts at the factory, and I picked up weekend hours at the library to make the mortgage payments.
For 10 years, every spare dollar went into fixing up that house. James installed the hardwood floors himself,
spending every weekend for 6 months on his hands and knees. I planted the garden, roses along the fence, hydrangeas beneath the windows, and a magnolia tree that James said would outlive us both.
and it has. At least it's outlived him.
James died 12 years ago.
Heart attack. Sudden, they said, though nothing feels sudden when you've spent 40 years with someone.
One minute we were discussing what to have for dinner, and the next he was gone. Thomas flew in for the funeral from Chicago, where he'd moved after college for his job in finance. He stayed for a week, helped me sort through James' things, and then flew back to his life.
I understood.
He had a career, a wife, responsibilities. I never wanted to be a burden. For the first few years after James died,
Thomas called every Sunday.
he and his wife Lisa would visit at Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. They never had children, too focused on their careers, Thomas explained. I didn't push. It wasn't my place to tell my son how to live his life. Still, I had hoped for grandchildren.
The house felt particularly empty without the pitter-patter of little feet I'd imagined would one day run through its halls. I stayed busy, though.
I had my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the hospital. I learned to navigate life as a widow.
Paying bills James had always handled. Fixing things around the house.
Finding rhythms to my days that didn't revolve around someone else's schedule.
I was managing just fine, thank you very much. When I turned 70, I noticed the calls from Thomas became more frequent.
First, I was delighted.
My son was checking in on me more often.
What mother wouldn't be thrilled?
But there was something in his voice, a concern that bordered on surveillance.
Mom, did you remember your doctor's appointment? Mom, are you still driving at night?
Mom,
Mrs. Peterson from next door called me
and said she saw you struggling with the garbage bins.
I didn't know Mrs. Peterson had my son's number. I didn't know a lot of things, apparently.
Last fall, I had a small accident. Nothing serious.
I missed a step coming down from the attic and twisted my ankle. I called Thomas just to let him know.
Not because I needed anything. That was my first mistake.
2 days later, Thomas and Lisa were at my door with suitcases. We're staying for a week, Mom, Thomas announced, not asking if that worked for me.
We need to talk about your future. My future?
I still had half a library book to finish and tickets to a garden show next month. My future seemed perfectly clear to me. That night, after I'd gone to bed, I overheard them in the kitchen. My bedroom was directly above, and the heating vent had always carried sound up from below. The house has to be worth at least $450,000 now, Lisa was saying.
Maybe more with the market the way it is. It needs work,
Thomas replied. But still, if we put maybe $50,000 into it, we could probably sell it for $550,000, maybe more.
Or we could rent it out,
Lisa suggested.
Generate some monthly income. First,
we need to convince her it's time for assisted living. She can't manage this place anymore.
I lay there, my heart pounding in my ears.
They were discussing my house, my home, like I was already gone. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with a say in her own life.
The next morning, Thomas broached the subject over breakfast. Mom, Lisa, and I have been talking.
We're worried about you here all alone,
I'm not alone.
I said, focusing on buttering my toast.
I have my friends, my neighbors.
Mrs. Wilson from book club checks on me every day.
Thomas exchanged a look with Lisa. But what if you fell again? What if it had been worse?
You could lie here for days before anyone found you. I have my cell phone, I countered.
And I'm not exactly decrepit, Thomas. I twisted my ankle. People of all ages twist ankles.
Lisa reached across the table and patted my hand.
I've never liked being patted.
Eleanor,
We've been researching some really wonderful retirement communities. Places where you'd have friends your own age, activities, and medical care if you need it. I have friends my own age, I said. And activities. And a doctor 5 minutes away.
Thomas sighed that familiar sigh.
The one that said I was being difficult.
Lon, you're not getting any younger.
This house is too much for you to maintain. The yard alone.
I have a landscaping service, I interrupted.
Johnson's. They come every 2 weeks.
I'm managing just fine,
But you shouldn't have to manage.
Lisa said, her voice dripping with false concern.
You should be enjoying your golden years. Golden years.
As if my life had been dipped in precious metal the moment I turned 65. For the next 5 days they tag-teamed me.
Thomas would bring up how unsafe the stairs were. Then Lisa would casually mention a fall her mother had taken. Thomas would point out a leaky faucet I hadn't fixed.
And Lisa would talk about how wonderful it would be not to worry about home repairs. They left brochures for Pine Grove Retirement Community on my coffee table,
My nightstand, even in the bathroom.
On their last night, Thomas finally showed his hand.
Mom, Lisa, and I have been thinking. We could really use this house.
I looked up from my crossword puzzle.
Use it how? Well, Chicago is so expensive, and if we want to start a family.
There it was. After years of no interest in children, suddenly they were dangling the possibility of grandchildren in front of me like a carrot. You want to move here?
To Melfield.
I asked, genuinely surprised. Thomas had always said there were no opportunities for him in our small town.
Not exactly.
He hedged.
We thought we might fix it up, sell it,
And use the money for a down payment on something bigger in Chicago.
The pieces clicked into place.
You want me to give you my house?
Not give.
Thomas quickly corrected.
But the equity in this place could help us both.
You don't need all this space.
And the money from the sale could pay for several years at Pine Grove. I set down my pencil.
Let me be clear, Thomas. You want me to sell the home your father and I worked our entire lives for. Move into a retirement facility I don't need or want, so you can have the money for a bigger house in Chicago. Lisa jumped in. Eleanor, it's not like that.
We're thinking of your safety. Your quality of life.
My quality of life is just fine, thank you. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. A gesture so like his father it momentarily took my breath away.
Mom, we've already put down a deposit at Pine Grove.
They have an opening next month. You can have a private room with a kitchenette.
It's really nice. You did what?
My voice had gone dangerously quiet. We knew you'd resist the idea, but once you see it, you'll love it. They have a garden club, Mom. And a library. And who's going to pay for this place if I don't sell my house?
I asked.
Another glance between them. Well, we thought you could take out a reverse mortgage.
Just until the house sells.
They had it all planned out. My life dismantled and rearranged without my input. I think it's time for you both to leave, I said.
Mom, don't be upset. We're trying to help. Thomas, I am not selling my house.
I am not moving to Pine Grove. And I am certainly not taking out a reverse mortgage.
So you can have a bigger house in Chicago. Now please go pack your things. They left the next morning in a cloud of disappointment and veiled threats about calling Adult Protective Services. As if being 72 and self-sufficient was a sign of mental incompetence. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong.
3 weeks later,
I received a call from a Dr. Reynolds,
who wanted to schedule a home visit to evaluate my living situation.
I hung up. The next day,
A social worker named Brenda showed up at my door with Thomas behind her.
Mrs. Wilson, I'm Brenda Holt from Adult Services.
Your son has expressed some concerns about your ability to care for yourself.
May we come in? I looked at Thomas, his face a mask of false concern,
And seriously considered slamming the door.
but I knew how that would look. Of course,
I said, stepping aside.
I have nothing to hide. For the next hour, Brenda asked me invasive questions while Thomas hovered nearby,
Occasionally chiming in with examples of my supposed decline. The time I forgot his birthday,
I hadn't.
I'd mailed his card 3 days early.
The hoarding situation in my basement, my organized collection of Christmas decorations and family mementos.
My paranoia about neighbors watching me, Mrs. Peterson did, in fact, spy on me from her window.
I'd caught her at it multiple times. Throughout it all, I remained calm and articulate.
I showed Brenda my well-stocked refrigerator, my pill organizer with my few medications neatly arranged, my calendar with my various appointments and activities.
I answered her questions about current events, the date,
Who the president was.
I did a little mental math for her.
I even walked a straight line across my living room when she asked, like some elderly person's sobriety test.
When she finally closed her notebook, I thought I'd passed.
I thought Thomas would be forced to abandon this ridiculous scheme.
Mrs. Wilson,
While I don't see any immediate concerns that would necessitate removal from your home,
I do think you could benefit from some additional support. Thomas perked up at this.
like assisted living, he asked eagerly.
Brenda hesitated.
Not necessarily, perhaps some in-home assistance to start with.
A few hours a week. I don't need.
I began, but Thomas cut me off. Mom, be reasonable.
Even Brenda thinks you need help.
That's not exactly what I said, Brenda interjected, but the damage was done.
From that day forward, Thomas was relentless.
He called daily, each time with a new angle, guilt. I worry about you constantly, Mom. Bribery. Pine Grove has a heated pool, Mom.
Threats. If you won't consider Pine Grove, I'll have to take more drastic measures.
Meanwhile, strange things began happening around the house. The thermostat would be set to 80 degrees when I woke up,
Making the house unbearably hot,
items I used daily would mysteriously disappear.
only to be found in unusual places.
My reading glasses in the freezer,
My house keys in the flour canister.
I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, until I installed a small camera in my living room and caught Thomas rearranging things during his visits.
The final straw came 2 months later.
I returned from grocery shopping to find an ambulance in my driveway and Thomas pacing on my front lawn.
What's happened?
I asked, my heart racing.
There you are.
Thomas rushed over.
I've been calling for hours. I thought you'd fallen. I told you I was going to the store this morning.
I said, confused.
I left you a voicemail.
The paramedics emerged from my house looking annoyed.
One of them approached me. Mrs. Wilson,
Your son called us saying you weren't answering your phone.
and might be incapacitated inside. Are you all right? I'm fine.
I assured him.
Just shopping. I'm sorry you were troubled for nothing. After they left, I confronted Thomas.
I told you I was going out.
I called and left a message. He produced his phone, showing me his call log.
No messages, Mom.
You must have forgotten. I hadn't forgotten.
I knew I hadn't.
That night,
After Thomas finally left,
I sat in James' old armchair and let myself cry for the first time in years.
what was happening to my son?
To the sweet boy who'd once made me Mother's Day cards with glitter and too much glue,
When had I become an obstacle to him, rather than a person?
but beneath the hurt,
Something else was growing. Anger. Pure, clarifying anger. I was being manipulated, gaslight, and bullied by my own child.
and for what? A house.
Money.
The next day, I made 3 phone calls.
The first was to my old friend Margaret, who had retired from her law practice 5 years ago, but still knew everyone in town. I need the name of the best estate attorney in the county, I told her.
Someone ruthless.
The second call was to my bank, where I requested all my account statements for the past year.
And asked them to flag any unusual activity.
The third call was to Pine Grove Retirement Community.
I'd like to come in for a tour.
I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice.
My son has been singing your praises, and I think it might be time for a change.
The woman on the phone practically bubbled with enthusiasm.
That's wonderful, Mrs. Wilson.
We already have your preliminary paperwork from your son. We can finalize everything during your visit. My preliminary paperwork?
I took a deep breath.
Lovely.
How about tomorrow? The next day,
I dressed carefully in my most matronly outfit.
a floral dress I usually reserved for funerals, a cardigan despite the warm weather, and sensible shoes. I even leaned a bit heavier on my rarely used cane.
If Thomas wanted a doddering old lady, I'd give him one. Pine Grove was exactly as I'd expected.
Beige walls, floral upholstery, and the lingering scent of disinfectant barely masked by potpourri.
The administrator, Mrs. Winters, showed me around with rehearsed enthusiasm.
And here's our activity room, where we have bingo every Tuesday and Thursday.
I nodded and smiled, asked appropriate questions about meal times and visitor policies,
and generally played the part of an old woman ready to surrender her independence.
Mrs. Winters was delighted.
In her office,
she pulled out a thick folder with my name on it.
Your son has already completed most of the paperwork. We just need your signature on a few things.
I flipped through the documents slowly, feigning poor eyesight.
Power of attorney forms, medical release forms, financial disclosure forms. Thomas had filled them all out,
forged my signature on some, and left others blank for me to sign. My goodness, I murmured.
Thomas has been thorough, hasn't he?
He's been so concerned about you, Mrs. Wilson. He calls us weekly to check on our availability.
How thoughtful,
I said, my voice tight. Would it be possible for me to take these home and review them? My eyes aren't what they used to be.
Mrs. Winters hesitated.
We really need them completed today if you want to secure your spot. We have a waiting list, you know.
Of course you do,
I said, reaching for my pen.
Such a popular place. I signed where indicated carefully, making sure each signature was shaky and slightly illegible.
Just different enough from my normal handwriting to matter later.
Should it come to that? Wonderful. Mrs. Winters beamed.
Now, your son mentioned you'd be moving in next Monday. Will that work for you?
Next Monday, 5 days away.
Thomas hadn't even had the decency to consult me about the date.
Perfect. Elite. Though there's still so much to do at the house.
Don't worry about that, she assured me.
Many of our residents take weeks to fully transition.
You can bring the essentials on Monday.
And your son can handle the rest. I bet he could. I drove home in a fog of disbelief and rage. My son had essentially committed me to a retirement home without my knowledge or genuine consent. He had filled out legal documents, forged my signature, and decided the fate of my home and possessions. If I'd been even slightly less cognizant or assertive, I'd have found myself moved out of my own house within a week. When I got home,
I called Margaret again.
I need to see that attorney tomorrow. The next morning, I met with Howard Schumer,
a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who listened to my story without interruption, taking occasional notes.
So,
he said when I'd finished,
your son is trying to force you into assisted living, so he can sell your house out from under you. Yes. And you want to stop him? No,
I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice.
I want to teach him a lesson.
Howard raised an eyebrow.
What kind of lesson did you have in mind, Mrs. Wilson? I leaned forward. I want to sell my house before he can. And I don't want him to see a penny of it. A slow smile spread across Howard's face. I think I can help with that. Over the next 3 days,
Howard and I executed a plan that would have made James proud. First, we had me evaluated by an independent geriatric specialist who certified that I was of sound mind and body, fully capable of making my own decisions. Next, we contacted a real estate agent specializing in quick sales.
The housing market was hot,
and my well-maintained colonial on a 1/4 acre was a desirable property. By Friday afternoon, I had 3 offers, all above asking price.
I accepted the highest.
A young couple expecting their first child who could close in 30 days. The thought of a baby finally living in that house made the decision easy. I also opened a new bank account at a different bank,
one Thomas had no relationship with. I began transferring my assets,
careful to leave enough in my original accounts to avoid suspicion.
Howard helped me update my will,
removing Thomas as the primary beneficiary, and instead designating a trust that would distribute my assets to several charities upon my death, with a modest stipend for Thomas that would be paid out monthly, enough to remind him of what he'd lost, but never enough to make a difference.
The hardest part was finding a new place to live.
I had no intention of moving to Pine Grove,
But I couldn't stay in my house once it sold.
Margaret came to my rescue again.
My sister's condo in Florida is sitting empty,
She said over coffee. She and her husband bought a bigger place last year,
but haven't gotten around to selling the old one.
it's in one of those 55-plus communities near Sarasota.
Beautiful place, 2 bedrooms, pool, clubhouse. You'd love it. Florida.
I'd never considered moving so far away.
Why not? It's warm, there's no snow to shovel. And Thomas would never think to look for you there. She had a point. Plus, I'd always wanted to try growing orchids.
One phone call to Margaret's sister later, and I had secured a 6-month lease with option to buy. It was all coming together faster than I'd imagined possible. The final piece was deciding what to do with my possessions.
The furniture could mostly stay with the house.
The young couple was moving from an apartment and needed everything.
But there were personal items, keepsakes, photos.
Things that mattered to me.
Things that should have mattered to Thomas.
I spent the weekend carefully packing what I wanted to keep: James' collection of first edition mysteries,
The good china, family photo albums.
the jewelry James had given me over the years.
My gardening journals.
I arranged for everything to be shipped to the Florida condo.
Then came the hard part. I had to face Thomas. He called on Sunday night.
As he had taken to doing in his campaign to monitor me. "Non,
I was thinking I could come by tomorrow to help you pack for Pine Grove.
that would be lovely, dear," I said, my voice honey sweet.
Why don't you come for lunch? Say noon. You're in a good mood.
He said, suspicion in his voice. "I'm just excited for this new chapter."
You were right, Thomas. It's time for a change.
The surprise in his voice was almost comical.
Really? Well, great. I'll see you tomorrow then.
I spent that night in my house,
My last night there.
walking from room to room,
Saying goodbye to the space that had held my life for 4 decades. I ran my hands over the kitchen counter, where I'd prepared thousands of meals,
I stood in Thomas's old room, now a guest bedroom.
and remembered the little boy who had once slept there. I sat in the garden as the sun set,
And watched the magnolia tree's shadows stretch across the lawn.
I wasn't just saying goodbye to a house.
I was saying goodbye to the mother I had been. The endlessly accommodating,
Eternally forgiving woman, who had raised a son who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience, and a source of potential profit.
that woman was gone now. Thomas arrived precisely at noon the next day, a self-satisfied smile on his face.
He was carrying a stack of empty boxes and a roll of packing tape. Ready for the big move, Mom?
He asked, setting the boxes down in the hallway. "Almost," I said.
Let's have lunch first. I made your favorite meatloaf sandwiches.
You followed me to the kitchen, talking nonstop about Pine Grove. "I spoke with Mrs. Winters this morning. Your room is all ready.
It's on the first floor, nice and accessible.
No stairs to worry about,"
How thoughtful.
I murmured, setting his sandwich in front of him. "I've been thinking about the house," he continued, taking a bite. "Lisa and I could probably tackle most of the updates ourselves. Save on contractor costs,"
In an M.
I said noncommittally. "The market's hot right now. If we work quickly, we could list by next month." I took a sip of my iced tea.
Thomas, there's something I need to tell you.
He looked up, mouthful of meatloaf.
Wes.
"I've decided not to move to Pine Grove after all." He swallowed quickly, his expression darkening.
Mom, we've been over this. It's not safe for you here anymore. And we've already paid the deposit.
"Everything's arranged."
Yes, you certainly arranged a lot without consulting me. Because you were being stubborn. This is for your own good.
I set down my glass carefully.
Thomas, do you remember when you were 10?
"And you wanted that expensive baseball glove?"
The one all the other boys had.
He frowned, thrown by the change of subject.
The Wilson A2000? What does that have to do with anything? Your father and I couldn't afford it. But instead of telling you that,
"We told you that you had to earn it. You spent the whole summer mowing lawns and washing cars. You earned every penny yourself."
Mom, I don't see.
"James wanted to just give you the money."
He hated seeing you work so hard. But I insisted you earn it yourself. Do you know why?
Thomas sighed impatiently.
To teach me the value of money, I guess.
"No.
To teach you that nothing worth having comes without effort or sacrifice.
That you can't just take what you want because you want it. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to him.
It seems that lesson didn't stick. What's this?
He asked, opening it suspiciously. Inside was a copy of the sale agreement for the house. Thomas's eyes widened as he scanned the document.
His face flushing red, then white. You sold the house? Without telling me.
His voice rose to a shout.
How could you do that? We had a plan. No?
Thomas.
You had a plan.
A plan to push me into a retirement home I don't need so you could profit from the house your father and I worked our entire lives to pay for. A house you haven't contributed a single dollar toward maintaining since you left for college. That's not fair.
I've been looking out for you. Have you? Was it looking out for me?
When you rearranged my belongings to make me think I was losing my memory?
Was it looking out for me?
When you turned up my thermostat to unbearable levels?
Then suggested I couldn't manage the house anymore? Was it looking out for me?
When you called an ambulance because I went grocery shopping? Thomas's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're confused. I'm not confused, Thomas. I installed a camera. I saw you. His face contorted with rage. You spied on me?
Rich, coming from the man who enlisted the neighbors to report on my activities.
This is insane.
He sputtered.
You can't sell the house. Where will you live?
That's no longer your concern.
Like hell it isn't. I'm your son. You're next of kin. And that entitles you to what exactly? My house? My money? My autonomy? He stood up, looming over me.
You won't get away with this. I'll contest the sale.
I'll have you declared incompetent. I smiled thinly.
You're welcome to try. But you should know I've had a full cognitive assessment by an independent specialist who has certified me as completely competent. I've also retained an attorney who has documented your pattern of elder abuse.
Elder abuse?
He exploded.
I was trying to help you.
Help yourself to my assets, you mean?
I stood up.
Refusing to be intimidated in my own kitchen. The sale closes in 30 days.
You have until then to remove any of your childhood possessions you wish to keep.
Anything left behind will be donated or discarded.
And where exactly are you planning to go?
He demanded.
That information is on a need-to-know basis.
I replied calmly.
And you don't need to know. This is ridiculous.
I'm calling Mrs. Winters right now.
Your room at Pine Groves was never paid for.
I finished for him.
Yes, I checked. You put down a fully refundable $500 deposit, Thomas.
Not exactly a significant financial commitment to my welfare, was it?
He stared at me.
His face a mask of shock and fury.
You've lost your mind.
No, Thomas. I found my spine.
There's a difference. He stormed out.
Slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled.
I expected to feel guilty, or at least conflicted.
Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. Thomas tried everything. He called Adult Protective Services again.
But my independent assessment shut that down quickly. He tried to challenge the house sale,
but had no legal standing to do so. He even showed up drunk one night, pounding on my door and shouting that I was a terrible mother who would die alone.
That one hurt.
But it also confirmed I was making the right decision. The young couple buying my house, Eliza and Michael, were a delight. They asked me about the garden, about the history of the house.
Eliza was 5 months pregnant.
And already planning the nursery, in what had been Thomas's room. Is so right somehow. A new family beginning where mine had essentially ended. On my last day in the house, I walked through each room one final time. I thanked the walls that had sheltered me, the floors that had supported me, the windows that had let in the light. I stood in the garden and whispered a goodbye to James, to the memories, to the life we'd built. Thomas didn't come to say goodbye. I hadn't expected him to. The flight to Florida was surprisingly easy. Margaret had arranged for a car to meet me at the airport.
And by sunset,
I was sitting on the lanai of my new condo, watching pelicans dive into the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I needed. I tried to call Thomas once I was settled. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message with my new address and phone number.
He never responded.
6 months later,
I received a letter forwarded from my old address.
Thomas had lost his job. The economy had turned apparently and his firm had downsized.
He and Lisa had separated.
The stress of losing out on their inheritance had been too much for their marriage. He was living in a studio apartment and struggling to make rent. The letter ended with a thinly veiled request for money.
I sat on my lanai, the Florida sun warm on my face, and considered my response. Part of me, a small vindictive part, wanted to send him a check for $500. The exact amount of the deposit he put down at Pine Grove.
Just enough to twist the knife but not enough to actually help.
But as I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink,
I realized something. The anger that had driven me for nearly a year had finally begun to fade. Not because Thomas deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to that anger was exhausting.
It was taking up space that could be filled with other things.
My new garden club, the watercolor class I'd started, the friends I'd made at the community center.
I wrote Thomas a letter. I told him I was sorry for his troubles but that I wouldn't be sending money. I explained that while I would always love him as my son,
I couldn't trust him anymore, not with my feelings, not with my well-being,
and certainly not with my finances. I reminded him that trust, once broken, had to be earned back through actions, not words or promises.
I didn't expect a response and I didn't get one. A year after moving to Florida,
I received another forwarded letter.
This one was different. Less demanding, more reflective. Thomas had found a new job, not as prestigious or high-paying as his previous one. He was in therapy, he said, working through his issues around entitlement and respect.
He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness.
He simply told me what was happening in his life and asked if he could call me sometime. I sent him my phone number. Our first conversation was awkward, stilted. We talked about the weather, about his new job, about my garden. We didn't mention the house or Pine Grove or my escape to Florida, as he called it.
But it was a start. Over the next few years,
we rebuilt something resembling a relationship. Not the close bond we'd once had. That was gone forever.
But something new.
Something based on clearer boundaries and revised expectations.
He visited me once,
staying in a nearby hotel rather than with me.
I showed him the beach, my favorite restaurants, the orchids I'd finally learned to grow.
He asked about the money from the house.
Not demanding it.
Just curious about where it had gone.
I told him the truth.
Most of it was in investments and savings that would eventually go to charity. His monthly stipend after my death would be enough to notice,
but not enough to change his life.
He nodded, accepting this without argument.
I was a real jerk, wasn't I?
He said as we walked along the shore on his last day. Yes, I agreed.
You were. I thought I was entitled to your house, because I was your son. Like being family meant I owned a piece of you.
Many people think that way.
I'm sorry, Mon. Truly.
I looked at him, this middle-aged man who had once been my little boy, and saw genuine regret in his eyes. I know you are, Thomas.
Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me? He asked.
I considered this as we watched the waves roll in.
I don't know, but I'm working on it. Just like you're working on earning back my trust. That night,
after he'd gone back to his hotel to pack for his flight home the next day, I sat on my lanai with a glass of wine. I thought about forgiveness, what it meant, what it cost, what it gave back. I thought about the house on Maple Street, about James, about the life I'd lived and the life I was living now.
I hadn't sold my house and moved to Florida to punish Thomas,
though that had certainly been part of my initial motivation. I'd done it to save myself,
to reclaim my autonomy,
to remind myself and everyone else that my life was still my own, to shape and direct as I saw fit.
Thomas had put me in a home to free up the house, so I'd sold it and left him with nothing. But in the process, I'd given myself everything. Independence, self-respect,
and the freedom to define the final chapters of my own story.
Sometimes, I still miss that magnolia tree in the backyard.
But I've planted bougainvillea and jasmine here. Different flowers for a different life.
And this life,
unexpected as it is, has turned out to be one worth living.
My name is Eleanor Wilson, 76 years old, and far from disposable.
I am the author of my own story,
the captain of my own ship, the keeper of my own keys. It took me 72 years to learn that lesson, but I've learned it well.
And if my story teaches you anything,
let it be this. It's never too late to stand up for yourself.
Never too late to say enough.
Never too late to begin again. even if you have to sell a house and move to Florida to do it.